Uh, David Bollier is someone whom all of us have heard at the keynote address a few days back, where he spoke to us about recovering the history of commons. David is a policy strategist, a journalist, an activist, and consultant with an evolving public interest portfolio. His work focuses on reclaiming the commons, understanding how digital technologies are changing democratic culture, fighting the excesses of intellectual property law, fortifying consumer rights, and promoting citizen action.
Now, a recurrent problem is how do we keep the fruits of the commons within the commons and not have it be appropriated or ruined or destroyed somehow? And one problem we have is that if you just do this through social means, it tends to be ineffective over the long term. You need some sort of legal background or backup or recognition. Unfortunately, historically, governments only want to recognize government power or individual power, not collective interests in some ways. There's a tremendous resistance to this, especially in the neoliberal market policy world, which increasingly is the global world. So this is kind of a challenge that we need to address, because how do we use the law to protect or help protect collective rights or interests? Now, there's some notable exceptions that we could probably build on, if only as a thought exercise of what does work, what has been applied. One are indigenous rights for indigenous communities, and First Nation in Canada, laws, New Zealand, others have explored this, and I think that's something worth exploring as a template maybe. I know that in Ecuador, the Constitution recently gave nature legal standing and rights, sort of fulfilling a prophecy from this famous essay in 1972 called "Should Trees Have Legal Standing?" by Christopher Stone. Well, an interesting notion for us to legally explore. And then, of course, you have in software code and so-called free culture the general public license, which Venkat will talk about, which is a legal means, copyleft, of protecting code from being appropriated. So you can develop a software commons and have legal backing for it. And similarly, the Creative Commons licenses for artistic and information content is a way to allow it to be shared but still owned. It allows you to create pools of shareable content legally. Otherwise, the copyright law doesn't allow an easy means to create shareable content. Another example we can build upon are trusts, which are a great example. A friend of mine says that trusts are to the commons the way the corporation is to the market. Generically, it's a concept that represents legally how we might protect the commons. But we need to expand and make these models for protecting collective governance and rights more robust, more suitable to the different resources that we're approaching. And I think this is really our major challenge. And those who say, well, we can't do that, my answer is government grants charters to corporations all the time to ostensibly serve public purposes. Why can't it grant similar charters to commonses to serve public purposes? However, we do have a burden of legal innovation we have to shoulder. I think that Shasti was right that we need to, this is about leveraging decentralized energy and creativity, because centralized bureaucracies can't handle complexity anymore. It's been shown that they're ineffective, whether we're talking about Hollywood or record labels or government agencies. And furthermore, the internet is demonstrating that decentralized commons governance is a highly effective way of managing resources. So government needs to get out of the way and stop resisting this. It needs to help facilitate it as opposed to trying to shut it down. Because we can see how commons-based forestry, commons-based irrigation, many other examples are helping as an alternative or a complementary form of governance. Digital commons are in the vanguard. I'll let Venkat talk more about that. But let me just say that it serves as a kind of shadow governance to government. And we need to sort of understand how, I think the big challenge is how that governance can be made compatible with traditional government in public policy. Um, I guess I'd like to emphasize that, how's my time? Okay. I'd like to emphasize that instead of focusing on policy per se, we should talk about creating the sovereignty of our commons communities, sort of in a sense, do-it-yourself policy making, because this is the basis for creating a power base, a political base with which to deal with both markets and government more effectively. So I'd just like to say that an excessive focus on policy could distract us from, I think, the more urgent priority of developing more durable, sustainable commons themselves. To do this quickly, we need to start to explore new ways of networking, how to federate commonses together, have more convenings like this where we can have conversations to get a broader, more ecumenical picture. And then more generally, we need to get this grand narrative going that recognizes the value proposition of the commons, which then will allow also diverse smaller commons to understand how they relate to the whole and to each other. So that's my sort of big picture scheme of how I think policy of the commons might evolve.
I was very struck on the opening ceremony where Ellen Ostrom said that in her view, common property is in no way inferior to any other form of property. At the same time, the minister said that we have to consider the trade-offs, but in 9 times out of 10, business interests will have to trump common. There seems to be a fundamental contradiction between the two. And David's keynote the other day, he said he wasn't against business. And it seems to me that one shouldn't be against markets. But what is the nature of the powerful interests which press down, as we've heard so often in this commons, are dispossessing the commons? And it seems to me that the enemy is not in the markets, but it's somewhere else.
Commons has always been inscribed in larger systems of power, and therefore it's not a wall-to-ceiling alternative. So I think that we should have a certain modesty about that. At the same time, I think the commons does provide a very special, if not unprecedented, staging area or platform for starting to articulate some alternative values to resist and proactively build, invent new alternatives, indeed a new theory of democracy, as he argues. And I think, now let me just segue to my second point about the digital platforms. I think the digital platforms are an important area. In some ways, coming from the United States, I'm more sensitive to this than perhaps a country like India, where finding a space that's protected from corporate control and appropriation is very difficult. So it's a major achievement to have some of these digital commons in which one can have these conversations and they're protected, archived, and so curated and so forth. Which leads me to another point, however. Digital platforms are often corporate owned, and just because you can share on it doesn't make it a sustainable commons very often. We can see the example of the Apple iPhone application that recently was, WikiLeaks had an Apple iPad app which was forbidden. And WikiLeaks has had a lot of other corporate retribution from corporate platforms. So we have to be wary of some of these corporate platforms as the basis upon our new digital commons is, which is why something like net neutrality as a policy is very important for creating sustainable digital commons if they're going to have long-term resistance power, so to speak.